You're listening to episode 38 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the show, everyone. On today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Jessica Levinson. She's a friend of mine. She's a dietitian. She's a mom of two beautiful little girls, and she's just written a new book. It's called The 52-Week Meal Planner. Now, if you are like me and you don't always plan your meals, this is definitely the show for you. But we're not just going to talk about meal planning. What we're going to do today is talk about dinner time dilemmas, and there's just so many of them. I survey you guys. I have my closed podcast posse on Facebook, and I ask you to ask me questions all the time. And what I'm seeing is this pattern, and it's a pattern of dinner time dilemmas. And so I thought, why not have Jessica come on the show, and then together we would answer your questions. Things like, if you've run out of ideas for dinner, where do you turn? Or if you're dealing with a picky eater or even a picky husband, what do you do? What should you stock in your kitchen? What should you stock in your kitchen so that when you walk in the door at 5 o'clock and you're wondering what to have for dinner, you can just quickly create healthy meals. And so we're going to kind of tackle all of your dinner time dilemma questions on today's show. And we're also giving away a copy of the 52-Week Meal Planner. And this is for U.S. only, but if you head on over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast, the show notes from today's show, episode 38, will give you instructions for how you can enter to win. So Jessica Levinson, as I said, she's a dietitian, she's a mom, and we have a lot in common because the focus of her website is on family nutrition and family recipes. And so if you check out her site and you go to her blog, you will already begin to get fresh new ideas for your family's dinner. Jessica's website is jessicalevinson.com, and you can follow her on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And so you can get to all of her social media sites through her website, or just head on over to my show notes and I will link you over. Liz's Healthy Table is brought to you by my friends at superhealthykids.com. Your one-stop shop for recipes, meal plans, cooking videos, and tips for feeding families. My show is also brought to you by Parents on Demand. This is an app which is filled with parenting podcasts, including shows like this new one that I just checked out, Mom and Mind. It's a first-of-its-kind podcast that really delves into understanding the mental health of pregnancy, birthing, loss, and postpartum families. Dr. Kat is your host on that show, and she interviews moms and dads, experts and advocates who bring light to the challenging parts of new parenthood. You can learn all about Mom and Mind and many more parenting podcasts at parentsondemand.com. So now, your dinner dilemma is about to be solved. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
So we have so many 1 degree of separations. For example, you live in the suburbs of New York City in a town that I grew up in. So just and of course we're dietitians. We both have 2 kids, but tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you live, your kids, all that good stuff.
Sure. So I live in New Rochelle, where you grew up, and I have twin girls who are 6.5. They just started first grade. And my husband and my dog and my kids and I live in the suburbs and have the suburban life.
Okay. The suburban life. You used to have the city life, right? You were kind of a New York City girl for a while.
I sure was for more than 10 years. And I was very hesitant to leave New York City because there's just so much convenience to being in the city. You walk out your door, you have so many places to go. Everything's at your fingertips. But I've taken to this suburban life pretty well at this point.
It's like an episode out of Green Acres. Remember that show? She would do the dishes and then she'd just throw the dishes out the window because she didn't want to do the dishes. I love that. So you're a dietitian, and I'm curious kind of how you got into that. Like, what made you want to be a dietitian?
So I actually came to nutrition through the psychology route. I studied psychology in college. That was my undergrad degree. And when I was deciding where to go for grad school or what to do, I had already been interested in nutrition for myself, and through college, learning to eat healthier for myself. And I decided that I really was interested in getting into the psychology of nutrition, which is not really what I do now at all, but that's sort of what started me down the path of dietetics.
Good stuff. So you have a new book out. It's called 52-Week Meal Planner. I fly by the seat of my pants when it comes to meal planning. You are super organized, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show, not only because you're so good at meal planning, but because you're just so good at feeding families. And I get so many questions about it. And we're going to really dig in today to a lot of these dinner dilemmas that we hear about. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about 52-Week Meal Planner. We are giving away a copy to our U.S. listeners. But tell me about this book. Tell everybody about it.
Sure. So I have been a meal planner for a long time, even before I had my kids. But I really, really delved into meal planning once my twins were born. It just was the only way that I could stay organized. And I had used a lot of different tools. There are different like pads of paper that I've tried and shopping lists on my phone and lots of different things. And I just never had everything in one place. So I wanted to make that resource for people because I really think meal planning is the key to success for really busy families and everyone in general, but I'm really focused on the family, and that's a lot of who I speak to. So the 52-Week Meal Planner has templates for 52 weeks of meal planning. I don't give you the meal plans, but it's a workbook so that you can fill it in, and it's all in one place. And what's great about that is that you can make notes on the meals that worked and the ones that didn't for your family. And this way, when you are in a pinch and you don't know what to make for dinner, you can look back at weeks. Like I used to just have my weekly plans on a piece of paper and I'd throw them out. And then I'd be like, wait, what did I make last week? And it's really good to have that as a resource. In addition, the meal planner book has templates for you to fill in grocery shopping lists. It also has price comparison sheets, which is really important for people who are on a budget, or if you're just like me and you really want to save every penny that you can. I look to see what's on sale at all the different stores that I shop at. And this price comparison sheet gives me a place to put that down so I can see, if blueberries are on sale one week at ShopRite and they're more expensive someplace else, then I'll go to ShopRite for my groceries if there's enough things that are on sale there. And then there's also a place to put your go-to recipes. So it's not a recipe book, but there are pages that I make once a week my crispy baked tofu. And even though I should know that recipe by heart because I make it every single week, I have that in there because I need to go back to look at the amount sometimes. And so that's a good resource as well.
Crispy baked tofu. Now this begs the question, how do you make that? I want to hear about that. And I want to link to that in the show notes.
Sure. So pretty much every tofu recipe that's on my site includes the crispy baked tofu. I add it to Buddha bowls, I add it to sheet pans and all that stuff. But basically, I drain it. I use a tofu express press, and then I cut it into cubes. I marinate it with lime juice, rice vinegar, soy sauce, and some sesame oil. And then I spread it on a baking sheet in one row, and I cook it on roast at a high temperature. So I do between 400 and 425. And that gets it crispy on the outside and tender on the inside without having to fry it. And it is so delicious. You want to snack on it because it's so good.
Yum. I'm going to make that because Tim, my husband, you've met Tim, of course. What am I saying? And Tim is a pescatarian. And, every now and then I'm like, all right, what are we making for dinner tonight for Tim? So that would be a good one. He would love that. I love this idea.
Delicious.
And that was like one of the big things people wanted to know on the show. When I survey my subscribers, they say that their biggest obstacle to family mealtime, 33%, they're at a loss for dinner ideas. So this tofu recipe, there you go. 25% say they don't have time for meal prep or planning. 16% say it's picky eaters that get in the way. So it really is this like, I'm at a loss for dinner. I hear this over and over, but if you Google recipes online, you get like bazillions and millions of recipes. I mean, how do you kind of wrap your head around that? I mean, how do you as a busy parent say, I'm at a loss, I just Googled and there's 48 million recipes. Like, how do you like even begin to plan? How do you do this?
Right. Well, so if you Google, obviously you're going to come up with so many options that's overwhelming. And I personally, the best way to plan that works for me and has worked for people that I've helped is to base your menu on what you already have in your kitchen. So, the first thing is to keep a stocked pantry. Make sure that you have certain canned goods, different whole grains, rice, quinoa, barley. I even like the packs of like the 90-second ready rice that you just put in the microwave. I've been using those a lot lately because it's so easy to make rice, but it's even easier to just microwave for 90 seconds. Mm-hmm. And having that pantry full of stuff gives you a starting place for a meal. And then using what's in season, I'm very big on buying seasonal ingredients from the produce aisle because you're going to save money doing it that way and it's going to taste the best. And so if you fill your refrigerator with the seasonal ingredients and things that are on sale, then you can look at everything you have and say, all right, I can make a pasta with a pesto. And pesto does not have to be hard. First of all, you could buy a ready-made pesto, or pesto can pretty much be anything. Traditionally, it's basil, Parmesan, pine nuts, and oil, but it doesn't have to be. If I have arugula that's going to go bad, I use arugula to make a pesto. I use whatever cheese I have in my fridge. Sometimes I make it without cheese and it's more of just an herb sauce, but it's a type of pesto. And so basically taking what you have on hand is the best way to come up with your dinner ideas.
I like this. What do you have on hand? But what about just like if you want to sit down, like with your book, and plan it out for the week? So maybe you sit down on a Sunday and you say, okay, I'm going to plot it out. I know what I have on hand, but now I want other ideas. Like, where would you send people? Obviously, your website, my website, and we'll have links to everything in the show notes. But where else would you send people to get dinner inspiration, healthy ideas that, kids will love too?
So, of course, you can go to Pinterest. That's one of my go-tos. You have to be a little careful, though. Not all the recipes that look beautiful come out right. Mm-hmm. That's a good place to go to even just get an idea. And then I still am like old fashioned. I go to cookbooks. I love cookbooks. And if you have a few good cookbooks in your kitchen, that's a great place. I also really like to use other parents for sounding boards. So Facebook groups, there are a lot of like mom groups. I'll go in there to see what people are saying. And a lot of times people are saying, what are you making for dinner tonight? Using that is a great way to get some ideas that you may not think of.
Good stuff. And, what do you do if you have a family member, let's say, who is picky? And it could be a husband, by the way. I hear this all the time. Or if you have someone with an allergy, or if you have, like me, one pescatarian, but then meat eaters. My boys will eat just about anything. So how, as a meal planner, do you go in to that, weekly plan? We're going to get organized now and kind of work around that. I mean, are you supposed to be making different meals? How do you do that? How do you manage that?
Definitely not making different meals. I am very opposed to being a short order cook. That goes also with picky eating. If your child doesn't like what there is for dinner, I'm very opposed to you going back into the kitchen and making something else. The key is to have enough items that you have a whole meal where one or two things is what offsets it from what makes it different for everybody else. So let's say you're doing Buddha bowls. That's one of my go-to meals. I roast a bunch of vegetables, and then I make my crispy baked tofu. Sometimes I make chicken in the Instant Pot. Sometimes I make ground beef. So depending on who you're feeding, you may have those different proteins, but the rest of your meal is the same. And granted, you don't want to be making all these different proteins every single night. But if you're organized enough, and that's part of why the meal planning is important, if you can do some meal prep in advance and you can grill a bunch of chicken breasts and then stick them in the freezer, then on a night that you're serving fish and you have somebody in your house who doesn't want the fish, you can pull out a chicken breast and have that be added to the Buddha bowl instead.
And just define Buddha bowl for people who don't know. What is a Buddha bowl? Tell us.
So it's become so popular. It's just sort of like, I just expect everybody knows what it is these days, but you're right. So basically it is a bowl of a grain and different vegetables and different protein. So that's my definition of it. And so sometimes I make it with brown rice. Sometimes I use farro. Sometimes I make quinoa. And then I roast a bunch of different vegetables. You could do raw vegetables if your kids prefer, or if adults prefer. And then I have different proteins and a sauce that I would put on top.
And avocado, of course.
Yes.
I love avocado. My favorite
I love avocado
food.
too.
My favorite food in the world. So what about those picky husbands who might not be on board with good nutrition, who might just want the meat and potatoes? How do you convince a husband or a partner, because I hear this from a lot of people who say, I'm on board with nutrition. I want to feed my family well. I just can't get my husband to join in on that.
Well, I think that it's important not to push it too fast. Give them meat and potatoes, but also have those vegetables on the side and slowly introduce them. And it's no different really than having a child who you need to introduce those healthier foods to. And if you go too quickly into putting it in front of them and forcing it on them, that's going to backfire. So the number one thing is to start slow. And then on top of it, I would say use flavor. If you start steaming all your vegetables and they're bland and they don't have flavor, some people like steamed vegetables, but for most people that I know, it's a bland vegetable item. If you add a little lemon juice or some zest or some spices, that really makes it more palatable. And I know my husband, I've gotten him to eat things that he never used to eat. Like he never liked salmon. Now he likes salmon if it's cold, or even I make a sheet pan salmon that has a bunch of Mediterranean herbs and spices. And he loved it the other night. And he was like, oh, we're having salmon. And then he was wowed by it. So it's important to keep experimenting as well.
Do you have a tip, like your best tip for picky eaters? Did your girls, who by the way are super adorable, and I have met them, so I say this from the heart. So have your girls ever gone through a picky eating phase? Like, what's your best tip for that?
So we are actually going through it a little bit now. I had a really good run when all my friends who had kids when they were 2 years old and 3 were going through picky eating. My girls were eating every single thing that I fed them. But now that they've been exposed to what other kids are eating more of the time, they have become a little bit more selective. I like to call it selective rather than picky. And my hope is that they will start selecting the foods that they used to eat more often soon. But for now, I just keep plugging away at it. I make what I make. And as long as there's one thing on the table that I know they like, whether it's just rice or it's just cucumbers for one of my daughters, that's it. And my thing is, if they're really hungry, they're going to have a few bites of it, of whatever I'm serving. And if they're not that hungry, then they're just going to eat what they like. And I'm not concerned that they're going to be hungry or starving, and they'll eat more at the next meal. It's important to just recognize that, take a look at the entire week. Don't look at each meal as its own, big entity, as if it's like, oh my God, they didn't eat that. They didn't eat breakfast. So what am I going to do? It's important to look at the entire week as a whole.
Okay, good. Good stuff. So I was just looking at this question from Leslie. She's one of our podcast posse members. And she said, how do you simplify this whole process? She says, sometimes I choose a recipe that looks good, but it makes me frazzled to cook it. How do you strategize about how much time to realistically, spend on a recipe? What are sort of the clues to look at a recipe in a cookbook or online, on Pinterest, wherever, and say, oh, that's going to be easy? Because I know personally for me, Jessica, sometimes I'll make a recipe and my husband will walk into the kitchen. He'll say, what the heck are you making for dinner? There's pots and pans, and he does the dishes everywhere. What a mess. I mean, for me, I love a sheet pan dinner. It's one pan. I love the slow cooker. I love the Instant Pot. I love these sort of one pot dinners. So besides that clue, like, it's all made in one vessel, what are some other clues for Leslie, where she could look at a recipe and say, oh, that's going to be easy versus I'm going to be, up to 10 o'clock tonight, doing dishes.
Right. So all those things that you mentioned are helpful and they're very popular now. So you can find a lot of recipes with them. One of the big things is people don't read recipes before they set out to make them. So they may look at the ingredient list, but they're not reading the recipe in full. Really important to read the recipe in entirety because often there is an ingredient that is expected to be cooked already in a recipe that maybe, a lot of those 15-minute meals call for cooked chicken is an ingredient. Well, if you don't have cooked chicken on your hand, it's not a 15-minute meal anymore. So important to read everything. Another thing, I am a huge fan of Trader Joe's. They have a ton of what I call convenience products. And these are healthy, good for you options like shredded Brussels sprouts, pre-done zoodles or, zucchini noodles, or now they also have them in sweet potatoes. They have cubed sweet potatoes. So you don't have to do the peeling and the chopping. And yes, there's a little bit of more of a price that you pay for that, but you're going to save a lot of time. And Trader Joe's actually is great because it does help you to keep the costs down a little bit. So those are two things to really keep in mind. Read the recipe in full and look for those convenience products that can save you time in the kitchen.
And then the whole time thing, because again, we get questions on that. People will say, well, what do I do with leftovers or planovers, however you want to call them? So if you've got chicken that you roast on a Monday, what do you do with that on a Tuesday? So your family isn't like, wait a minute, we had that last night. Or, if you made pulled pork in the slow cooker, which is one of my favorites, or chili, like, oh my gosh, Mom, I don't want to eat this 3 nights in a row. So what are some ideas for kind of shaking it up?
So first of all, I love making things that I have leftovers because it saves me from having to cook every single night of the week. But also it's great to put those things in the freezer. So if your kids are getting sick of it, stick it in the freezer and you have dinner for next week. But I would also say use the leftovers for lunch. Often I pack leftovers in my girls' lunch boxes. You could also, something like pulled pork or chicken, you can have a taco one night. You could have it on a Buddha bowl another night. You can make burritos out of it. I mean, you can just change the way you're using it. You can use it to make chicken salad and put it, on a sandwich or on top of a salad. So trying to think of ways to turn them into something else. I mean, I agree, kids and husbands. My husband is not a fan of leftovers. So that's something that I struggle with sometimes is, okay, I don't want to cook every single night, but, how am I going to turn this into something new that he's still going to enjoy?
I love this recipe that I do where you just grill up salmon, right? So you grill it or you bake salmon. And you do extra. So the next night you've got leftovers. And one of my favorite ingredients from Trader Joe's is just their flour tortillas. So you get your flour tortillas and then you make quesadillas. So you add some of the leftover cooked salmon. You can add some black beans. You can add a little of the all-natural barbecue sauce that they sell at Trader Joe's, a little bit of shredded cheese. We are cilantro lovers, so I'll add some fresh cilantro. And then you just kind of layer it on one side of the flour tortilla, fold it over, and then just cook that in a skillet. So everybody gets these quesadillas with the leftover salmon, and then you can have a salad on the side. And so if you just buy fresh lettuce, if you're at the farmer's market, or even the prepared greens. I'm into arugula right now. So these are great ideas. I think, when people are using your 52-week meal planner, you could say bake salmon on a Monday and then the quesadillas on a Tuesday. And now I've got canned black beans. I'm going to grab those. I'm going to buy some shredded cheese. I need to get cilantro, whatever it might be. I think we have to be thinking about leftovers as we're planning.
Absolutely.
Shake it up. Shake it up.
And that sounds delicious.
Thank you. So Katie Wilson, who's another Posse member, she has a discerning 5-year-old, a discerning husband. She has a newborn. So she wants meals that she can prep in increments, or she can even cook one-handed. So that's really like increments. Like, what do you mean increments? Like you could do something, I'm thinking for Katie, she could do some prep the night before and then kind of be ready the next day, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have to take advantage with little kids like that. You have to take advantage of nap time. That's what I did when my girls were babies. I would do my prep during nap time. And if you can, for example, roast a bunch of vegetables at one time, and then you have them in your refrigerator, or you cut up raw vegetables and you keep them there that you can then easily throw into a salad, or you can add the cut up peppers to a sheet pan for a sheet pan meal that then gets roasted. It's really important to take advantage of the time that you have to do prep.
So I've got Gail here, another Posse member, and she says she's been trying to eat more plant-based. And I will tell you, Gail, if you did not listen to one of my very first podcasts with Sharon Palmer, the plant-powered dietitian, then tune into that because she has tons of ideas. But Gail says that she tends to eat the same things over and over. And so she's just looking for some basic ideas of just how to get more plant-based meals on the table rather than, same thing over and over.
Yeah, I mean, that can be tricky because there's only so much variety, but I think it's about using different flavors for the food. So let's say tofu is one of your foods, making it with different spices and different sauces, that changes it up. Using your grains, whole grains, beans, lentils, really taking advantage of things that are available in the supermarket, like the, pre-cooked lentils, for example, is a great way to just throw that in, and you're going to get more protein in for those plant-based meals. It can be tricky though. What are your suggestions?
Well, I was just thinking when you mentioned the pre-cooked lentils, I've seen some recipes online. You can Google this, Gail, for shepherd's pie. And instead of ground meat, they use lentils, or you can get the meat-free crumbles, those meat-free grounds, and then you can make tacos, and you can use the meat-free crumbles or the cooked lentils in tacos. And so it's really, I think, when you're going plant-based, think about your favorite meat-based meals, and then look for those alternatives. They even have the faux chicken out there, right? And so it sort of tastes like chicken. It's got the same texture. So you're sticking with the same recipes you've always made, but you're just doing those swaps.
You just reminded me, actually, that I have a recipe, and I haven't made it in a long time. So now I should put it on my meal plan for next week. I have a lentil Bolognese, and it's the same idea, using lentils, or you could do the meat-free crumbles, is a Bolognese, and then I put it over pasta, or you put it over polenta cakes. That's a great idea.
I have a recipe on my website using spaghetti squash. And speaking of Buddha bowls, what it is you cook the spaghetti squash. And I'll give a link in the show notes, and I'll talk you through how to do this. It's super easy. But you roast the spaghetti squash. You've cut it in half and, you roast it. And then you've got a bowl, because the spaghetti squash, you're not going to eat the actual outer skin. It's too tough. But you shred it up, and now you've got the spaghetti squash, but then you top it with all sorts of things. I have a bean-based sort of taco mixture I do. I use the meat-free grounds and mushrooms to make a bolognese, like you just described, with pasta sauce or marinara sauce. And so you've got this hearty spaghetti squash as kind of your foundation. And then you top it with different things. And so you can really start to get creative with plant-based. And I think once you kind of get over that hurdle of like, ooh, there's so many recipes out here, really kind of hone in on the things you love and just morph them a little bit.
That's great.
I love that idea. Now I'm thinking I'm actually going to do a winter squash episode. So just, a little teaser for my listeners. And there's some new types of squash that are coming on the market that are gaining in popularity, like the spaghetti squash, that people are cooking more and more. And I have a recipe for acorn squash, and I fill it with this ground beef mixture, and I add some of that natural barbecue sauce and pomegranate seeds. It's just so good. It sounds
delicious.
Oh my God, it's delish. I love it. So be thinking about squash. Any other ideas, Jessica, while we're on the plant-based discussion?
I was on the squash topic. I would assume you're going to include delicata squash. And that's one of my favorites. And I have a lot of recipes with that, and it's so delicious.
Well, I just happen to have a delicata squash on my kitchen counter right now. And here's what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to slice it in half, scoop out the seeds, and then slice it into thin half moons. And then I will roast those on a baking sheet. And I do have this on my website. And I'll give a link in the show notes. I'm going to have this roasted squash, and then I'm going to add it to a Buddha bowl. And in that Buddha bowl, you'll have cooked farro. Farro is like an ancient grain, and I get the kind that cooks up in like 10, 15 minutes. I've got some kale in there that I just chop up kale. I'm going to add shelled, lightly salted pistachios and some chopped up apricots, dried apricots. And it is so good. You could actually add goat cheese. You could add some grilled shrimp, whatever you like. But that delicata squash is definitely destined for a new recipe, which is coming soon to my website. So thank you for reminding me.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it.
Now, what about fresh herbs? This makes me so annoyed. I make so many recipes with fresh herbs, and they sit in my fridge, and I'm like, oh, I'll get to them. I'll store them. They won't go to waste. And then I open my fridge, and they've gone bad. And I know there's like the hardy herbs, like thyme and rosemary. And then there's those delicate fresh herbs like cilantro and basil. So give us some pointers for how to incorporate fresh herbs into our meal planning and not having them go to waste. Can you freeze them? How do you store them?
Well, first of all, if you were a meal planner, you wouldn't have them go to waste. So that's one of my first tips is that if you meal plan,
I'm busted.
Then you'd be looking in your fridge and say, okay, what do I need to use up before it goes bad? But putting that aside is up for meal planning. Definitely you can freeze them. The delicate herbs, the hardier herbs like thyme and rosemary, you can actually dry. You can dry them. And I actually, if I recall, Deanna Seagrave Daly she does the Healthy Kitchen Hacks, and she just did something about drying herbs. So that was on her Facebook feed, and maybe we can find the link to that and you can add that to the show notes. But there are different ways to freeze them. I like to actually, if I see they're going bad, I like to use them up to make sauces. So I'll make an herb sauce that I'll then put on top of steak or chicken. I also will add herbs to salad. People sometimes don't think to do that, but it adds a nice pop of flavor, like mint or cilantro in a salad is a really nice, refreshing addition. So those are some of my favorite ways.
I love that. I know sometimes people will take fresh herbs like basil and just put them in a glass of water and then leave that on the counter or pop it in the fridge with a plastic bag over it. And there's sort of different rules for different herbs. And this is where I always get tripped up, I have to say, true confession, because each herb, you sort of have to treat it a little differently. And this is where Dr. Google comes in handy, right? You just got to Google it and figure out the best way to store basil, the best way to store rosemary, just to keep it lasting longer in the fridge.
Right. Basil, I have to say, basil is tricky. I've tried every way that has been described by Dr. Google, and I just don't have good luck with basil. I love basil, but when I buy it, it doesn't last for too long.
I have some in my fridge right now because the other night, and this is another idea for everybody listening, I made a seafood recipe. I got it off of Mom's Kitchen Handbook. Katie Morford is the blogger there. But she had cooked a seafood in parchment recipe that she got from another cookbook. So I figured, all right, if she's blogging it, then it's obviously a recipe that works. And it called for haddock, but I used cod. And then you basically place it on parchment, and then you add corn kernels and mushrooms and onion and this little olive oil, champagne vinegar sauce. You add some lemon, and then you just cook it right in the parchment. It's called en papillote. That's the French name. You could cook it in foil, but I think people don't do this enough where they actually cook seafood in a pouch in parchment, and it cooks up in like 20 minutes. I actually have a recipe for salmon in teriyaki sauce, which is cooked in parchment, on my website, or you could use foil. And I think that is just like an underutilized, super easy, no muss, no fuss kind of a recipe for busy families.
It absolutely is. And it's a great way to get more fish into the diet, because a lot of people are concerned about fish smelling up their house and they don't like the taste of it, but it actually is super tender when you put it into the foil or the parchment paper pack. And I personally don't find that fish makes my house smell too much, but for people who do, I think that the pouch, keeps it inside a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's moist because, it doesn't dry out. So fish in parchment, I think people need to jump on that bandwagon, and that's a great, great way to get healthy meals onto the table. Okay, a couple more questions. The slow cooker. I have a favorite slow cooker recipe which is pulled pork. And it's so easy because it's just like one pot. You just dump it in, you turn it on, and you go. And basically it's diced onion, red bell pepper, and a carrot that you peel and you shred on the large holes of a box grater. I use lean pork loin, and then I add barbecue sauce. And I'm back to that Trader Joe's, the all natural. It's not too spicy because I'm not like a spicy person. And then in it goes, and you cook it for like 8 hours on low. And then you shred it up. And the pulled pork is so good because you can have it on slider buns. You could serve it over rice. You can add it to the Jessica's Buddha bowl, like you name it. So that's my go-to slow cooker. And I'm curious, Jessica, what is your go-to slow cooker recipe?
So actually, I don't have a slow cooker.
Oh, that's right. You told me that. You need to get one.
I know. It's been on the list. I did recently get an Instant Pot. Last year, I got that and I love it. I mean, I'm still playing around with it and trying to figure out, what exactly I want to make, but it's super easy in terms of just making like the same thing that you described. I don't eat pork, but I make pulled chicken or pulled beef, and soups also is great. But I know people love their slow cookers. I just haven't gotten one. And, there's kitchen space is so valuable.
Yeah, it's like you need an addition on your kitchen. I got the Instant Pot. I actually did an episode with Melissa Clark on the Instant Pot. She's a writer for the New York Times food section. And the one thing I just made in the Instant Pot that is so good, and this is a good lesson for everybody. So I have a recipe I cook in the slow cooker. It's a bean and barley soup. I made it in the slow cooker, and it takes like 6 hours. I made it in the Instant Pot. I'm not making this up. 7 minutes.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It's unbelievable. And I need to update my blog post on that recipe because it was so easy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe this. And it freezes well, so you can make a double batch. It's such a good recipe.
Yeah, people are making all sorts of things in the Instant Pot. People make cakes in the Instant Pot I've seen. I haven't tried that yet, but
right.
I will say soup, stews, and even pasta and rice, which those seem like just simple things, but waiting for the water to boil sometimes it's part of what takes so long when it's a weeknight and you just want to give your kids dinner. Doing it in the Instant Pot is so much faster.
Yeah, and I think Melissa Clark's coming out with another cookbook where she features a lot of pasta in the Instant Pot. And I haven't tried it yet, but I did make a quiche. I made a quiche in the Instant Pot. Yeah, that was kind of cool. So look at slightly weird texture, I have to say. I might not do that again. I know people make hard-boiled eggs. Yeah, it's like so convenient.
I did artichokes in the spring in the Instant Pot, and boy, were those amazing.
Ooh.
So much faster because I usually just steam artichokes and it takes a while for them to cook through, but doing it in the Instant Pot was like 5 minutes, 8 minutes maybe.
When I was growing up in New Rochelle, New York, my mother, she was a home ec teacher and she cooked every night for the family. So I've got all these great memories of hanging out in our 1960s kitchen with her, the avocado green. I'm not making it up.
So nice.
And so great. But she used to make artichokes all the time. And then we would peel the leaves off and dip them in melted butter and just kind of eat, the yumminess. And then, of course, you had the artichoke hearts as well. And it's like this vivid memory growing up eating artichokes of all things. My mom was quite the cook.
Yeah, that sounds like it. I actually was introduced to doing that when I studied abroad in Italy during my junior year of college. And I make it now all the time. I don't do melted butter, but I'll do like a vinaigrette with balsamic vinegar, olive oil, a little bit of grainy Dijon mustard, salt and pepper. And my girls actually love it. And what's fun for them is the whole experience of peeling the leaves. And it's like an interactive, fun dish to have. Even when you're having like a dinner party, it's like something fun to talk over.
So let's kind of wrap it up with that concept of making it interactive. This show is all about solving your dinner dilemmas. And we've gone through and we've offered lots of simple ideas for making dinner more of an easy reality for people. But at the end of the day, you really want it to be fun. You want everybody to be involved. And we really haven't hit on that concept of making it interactive at all levels, from planning to prepping, to actually the experience of eating dinner together.
Yes, I am in favor of all of that. And Like no child is too young to involve them. When my girls were little, I would put them in their high chair. I would roll the high chair over to the kitchen counter so they could watch me chop up food and make stuff. And now they are happy and excited to help me in the kitchen. One of my daughters just peeled 4 pounds of carrots for me last week for the holidays, for the Jewish holidays. I mean, it was such a big help to me and I was so excited. And they tend to eat things that they're involved in prepping and even in meal planning, getting them involved in sitting down with your 52-week meal planner and saying, okay, what's something that you want this week? And if everybody has a different choice, well, Monday night could be Charlotte's choice and Tuesday night is Daddy's choice and Wednesday night is Mommy's choice, changing it up. It's a great way to get them involved and to make it a little bit more of a family affair, which has so many benefits.
With your readers, this 52-week meal planner, can you share a story from somebody who's now using it and maybe how it's really changed their life and made life so much easier for them? So give us a story, a success story.
Yeah, well, so it's recently published, so I haven't gotten too many success stories in yet, but they're rolling in slowly. And I'd say people are just finding that it's organizing them. They're getting their kids to eat the meals that they make because it's not like a last minute decision what to cook. And I also had a reader who uses it for her exercise too. She has turned it into a meal and exercise journal to help her stay organized with that and to make sure that she's getting in the exercise, which is an important part of the equation for a lot of people. And so just, really staying organized and getting the kids involved, knowing what you have on hand, all of those tips that I provide in the beginning of the book have been very helpful for people.
Yeah, I wish I was more organized, but it's just, if you could see my desk right now, you'd say, oh boy, oh my. It's not in my genes, but I still think I'm really good at just throwing last minute things together. The other night, Tim and I were out of town. We got home late. He says, oh, should we go to Trader Joe's? I'm like, no, I can pull something together. I had 2 sweet potatoes on the counter. I roasted them in the oven. I had eggs, so I made cheese omelets. I had some bread in the fridge because I didn't want it sitting out on the counter all weekend. And we just had a really yummy dinner. I know we had one other thing. I can't quite remember what it was. So it's like, what do you have that you can cobble together? And sometimes those are the best meals. So get organized, but also take advantage of what's on hand and just make it fun, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Jessica, anything else you want to share with my listeners on Dinner Dilemma Solved that I haven't hit on with you?
Well, I would just say that I have a lot of recipes. So I know you're going to put the links in the show notes.
Tell us your website.
JessicaLevinson.com is my website. Pretty easy. It's just my name. And I really hope that people start to meal plan a little more. I know that you're fly by the seat of your pants, but it does help, especially when you have young kids and you're really trying to get them to eat, especially when you have to plan lunches, breakfast, dinner, even you have to plan everything. It's good to be able to sit back and know that you have a plan in place.
Excellent. Great advice. I can't thank you enough. And then tell us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, how we find you.
It's at JLevinsonRD on all of them. And on Facebook, it's Jessica Levinson, MS, RDN, CDN is my business page.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with the book. Tell Andy and the girls I say hi. And I want to remind everybody also to head on over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast to enter the giveaway. Jessica, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if you love the podcast, I welcome everybody to head on over to Stitcher, Radio, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. Post a review, subscribe if you haven't already. Tell your friends all about the podcast. And again, lizshealthytable.com/podcast. Today's episode, the show notes will be packed with great ideas and information on how you can enter to win a copy of the 52-week meal planner by Jessica Levinson. I'm so glad she joined me today. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you soon.